have the pleasure to introduce Bjarke Ingels Group. I will not say anything about it because obviously there's no need to introduce them. Everybody knows, but just as a very short intervention so that you know who is going to speak, it's Andy Young, one of the partners in Bjarke Ingels Group London office, and Ioannis, project leader of Asset Campus. Their presentation will lead us from the office's reflection on sustainability, followed by several examples of how they approach sustainability in their design, and finishing by the obvious, what we are all looking forward to, which is Asset Campus here in Bratislava. Enjoy. Floor is yours.
Wow, hello. It's absolutely tremendous to be here by the side of the Danube. It's quite something. So, we're going to have a wide spectrum of discussion today. Obviously, myself and Gio, we're both from BIG, both working on something in Bratislava, which Gio will explain in due course. The title of today's talk is It's Complicated, because these are the most kind of commonly used words when we try and explain to clients and stuff what we're doing. It's kind of, why are you insisting that I don't have any gas boilers in my building? It's complicated, because ask an engineer, a gas boiler is something that has, it's much more energy efficient for heating than electric heat pumps. But we're converting to electric heat pumps because in future they won't rely on fossil fuels at all. So there's a lot of things that are very complicated. And I think, as you'll probably see, I'm going to hugely simplify all of these complicated things. So, where do we start? Let's just look at the world we live in. How can it possibly be that petrol is cheaper than orange juice? It is in England for sure, and I think it is pretty much all over Europe. So, I just can't understand why that is. When you think about all the things you have to do to get petrol, you have to go to some faraway lands, somehow divine where the oil is under the ground. That sounds quite difficult to me. And then when you've done that, you have to build a drilling rig. You have to sail the drilling rig out to the ocean perhaps, or transport it overland. You have to drill the oil, you have to collect the oil, then you have to transport the oil to a refinery after you've built a refinery. And then you run the refinery, you take the oil, make it into petrol, put the petrol in tankers, and then drive the tankers to special shops which only really sell petrol, with staff that are dedicated to selling petrol to people. That's completely bonkers in comparison with orange juice, where orange juice, typically there's kind of a couple of guys in straw hats that kind of let nature grow some oranges, cut them, squeeze them, put them in bottles, and then drive the bottles to shops that don't just sell orange juice, and they don't have a specific member of staff next to the orange juice saying, hey, would you like some orange juice? So it's kind of completely bonkers that that's the world we live in. And the reason why I think that is it's complicated. So if there were any economists in here today, they would probably say, well, the reason is that, orange juice is expensive because that's how much people are prepared to pay for it. Which has kind of got a logic. It's kind of factual, but the logic doesn't really kind of add up. Right? So the reason it's complicated is because scientists, technologists, and engineers are incredibly clever, and they have the capability to completely transform our world. And so they have. But the rules and the societies that are commanding these very clever people are behind the times, particularly in relation to the impending climate disaster. So I think what the message today from me personally is that we should try as hard as we can to harness the power of engineers, technologists, and scientists in the next phase, because we cracked the whole petrol thing, right? And that was really, really tricky compared with orange juice. So the next thing that we must look at is that scientists, technologists, engineers, they operate in a slightly different way from the rest of us, right? So for these people, their mind works in a particular way, and that is about truth and facts and not making mistakes. Whereas all the rest of us in the world, the kind of social beings, where we all kind of hang out together and we debate things, we debate them, but we don't have the same rigor in what we do that scientists do. So an engineer, for example, can't design a building which is going to fall down. If it does fall down, it's a failure. It's absolutely measurable as a failure. Whereas with all of the rest of us, we can kind of form an opinion, and then we can labour that opinion when we're talking to people. And as a result, it means that sometimes we're not making progress because we're not actually measurable in the here and now. It's not entirely clear who's right and who's wrong. So let's just dwell on that for a moment. There's two kind of major ways of reasoning and discussing things going on in the world. So scientists and engineers, that for them, being correct is everything, being right and managing to do things correctly. So make bridges that don't collapse, make buildings that don't fall down, make spaceships that don't blow up, etc. All kinds of stuff. And when you think about the difference between petrol and orange juice, those people, because of their focus and their abilities and the power of civilization and knowledge, can achieve for us anything. The thing is that when you put an engineer in charge of making a meal, for example, you tend to get a kind of engineered response, and that is the correct answer. So perfectly nutritious, sealed away in a package that means that it will never go off, dispensing with the idea of cutlery and crockery and stuff. You just kind of suck the meal out of a bag. And they're right, but they're kind of not right either in that respect. So all the rest of us in the world that are not absolutely focused on delivering incredible scientific progress for society, all the rest of us, like, we kind of make decisions on what we think feels right. This kind of feels right. I think this is the right thing to do. But we don't get measured on our kind of arguments that are to do with what we feel is right, in the same way that engineers and scientists do. So being objectively correct about things doesn't really count so much for all the rest of us that aren't focused on achieving an incredible scientific breakthrough. So what that means is that it's complicated, but it also means that we know we've got the answers. We know that we, as humans, have everything we need to solve the climate crisis, for example. It's all there. The difficulty is in implementing it. So if you left it to engineers alone, you would get all of these reports made, and they would be passed on to lawyers and lawmakers in countries, and they would pass legislation that would solve the climate crisis. But that might be, for example, a silly example is that children's birthday parties all have a carbon footprint, and to an engineer, they're perhaps not as necessary as some other things. So therefore, you would be looking at a society that would pass laws to abandon the idea of children's birthday parties because of all these plastic toys and kind of like party poppers and stuff. It's like, but that's not right, is it? We're so good. You look at how well the engineers have delivered petrol instead of orange juice. We don't need to go to that extreme. The answers are here, and we have got those answers with us. So at Big, you've probably heard this before, but one of the tenets of our work is the idea of hedonistic sustainability. And what that means is that we truly believe that it shouldn't hurt to do good. Right? The idea of energy saving and sustainability can often be associated with the idea that in the winter the temperature is turned down and you put 2 jumpers on and maybe in my case 3 hats. And that's not what it's about. We are not going to deliver that world. We're going to do something completely different. So we tend to look at things like this. Planet Earth is a 510 million square kilometre mixed-use site. And each one of our jobs is one tiny pixel in that picture. And we know that it's complicated. We live in, as I think actually in the last few weeks, if you watch the news, you'll see how interconnected and complicated everything is. Germany can't afford to turn off its gas because industry will suffer, and then economics will suffer, and then society will suffer, and people will suffer. So there's difficulties here with all this stuff. So we have got enough of the answers to do things right. And so we know, for example, that interesting point here, if you think of, the world at the moment has 7 billion people. Let's assume that it's going to take us time to deliver all the solutions. And the Earth has 10 billion people by the time we get there. And we're not having it that people at the moment, a lot of people don't have a very high standard of living. Let's assume that everybody in the world, 10 billion, have the same standard of living as people in Singapore, for example. Well, there's an energy load that comes with that, and that energy load could be delivered by 5.6 million square kilometres of solar, simple, commercially available solar cells. But we're not going to be able to implement this scheme. It's a bit too simplistic because, as we know, it's actually complicated. And likewise, with wind farms, 16.1 million kilometres of the Earth, it's not a massive thing when the site is 510 million square kilometres, could do that. But these are not likely to happen. So instead, we have to look in the short term, like all our schemes are one pixel in the big picture of Spaceship Earth. So I'm just going to quickly run through some examples, and I'll hand over to Gio. Now, if we and the first example, these are all power stations. This is what happens to a power station when you get engineers that designed all the most incredible and powerful and useful equipment inside the power station, but when society says, oh, it's a power station, it'll be an ugly engineering thing. Let's just put it away somewhere that's not in the centre of town where people can't see it. And therefore, these things kind of tend to be quite grubby and ugly. Now, this is an example of a building that our colleagues in Copenhagen have actually completed. There is a lot of waste generated in cities. Now, even if we could go fully carbon neutral with our energy supply, our affluent lifestyles would still generate waste. And the waste, you can imagine a situation where you've kind of got the abundance of electricity. All electricity is more or less free because for many, many years it's been delivered by solar cells and wind farms. And you go to a city and say, well, what's that over there? Well, that's a pile of all the rubbish that we made. We're still making rubbish, even though our electricity is now carbon free. So this is a short-term solution, but what it looks at is the power of rubbish to make heat and power, but with a kind of cultural twist. So 1 tonne of rubbish is equivalent to 266 litres of oil. In Copenhagen, everybody loves skiing, but it's as flat as a pancake, and there's no mountains. But there is a mountain of rubbish, which is made every year. And all the skiers have to head off to Sweden in order to go skiing. So what the project does is takes a power station that burns rubbish, makes heat for the community and makes electricity, has an awful lot of equipment to purify the gases that come out of it. It does produce some CO2, unfortunately, but that's because there's combustion involved. And on the top of it is a ski slope, a nature trail, a park, a cafe, and Europe's biggest climbing wall. You can see here that the kind of cultural item that makes this something that we can all love, and also incidentally means that there was no legal battle, which could have been a pricey thing in terms of locating this building in the town centre. That sits on top of a very, very complicated and state-of-the-art kind of waste processing and power generation unit. And here's the building completed. It is used, it's open, you can go and hire some skis and you can ski down it, or you can just walk all the way around in the nature trail and get a coffee at the top. It's quite a remarkable thing, and we are very, very proud. Here's another thing that we're doing, which is about the reuse. This is kind of a program rather than a project. It's about the reuse of shipping containers, and what it is a kind of student and low-cost housing solution, which is made of shipping containers and concrete pontoons. And these things already exist. You put them together in a clever way, and you can make housing which can be deployed wherever it's needed. This is a kind of program that we're running in Copenhagen. And you can see it's not the most spectacular environment, but there are some kind of bonuses to living on the water, which I think you can probably see. Another thing is, I suppose, in the world of outlawing things that might be wasteful, we got commissioned to design a watch museum for a very famous Swiss watchmaker. And this is something that you couldn't really renovate the existing buildings to deliver. And therefore, we went down the route of making a new building on the site. And it's kind of quite a remarkable thing. And I think there's a message here that sometimes we should be allowed to do something where renovation is not necessarily the answer. When the right opportunity comes, we should seize the moment and do something quite remarkable. The next example is Noma, which is it's widely regarded as one of the world's best restaurants. Used to be in the town centre in Copenhagen, moved outside of town to an old army building, and we worked kind of quite carefully to make a building that sits in its own environment. It's a renovation of some old army barracks, and it provides greenhouses and space to grow some of the ingredients, and the interior and the construction of the buildings is made from local materials from nearby, from near to the site. Another example of kind of where I think architects and creative people can work very, very well with creative engineers is when a client comes and says, we want you to design two things, a car park and a block of flats, please. And you can guess what we did, which is nobody wants to live next to a car park, right? So you can live on top of it and have a remarkable car park and really lovely homes, which are more like houses than flats. If somebody comes to you and says, I want a bridge and a gallery, I think you can probably figure out what's coming. The two things get kind of combined, so it's a sort of brallery and a kind of gorgeous place inside. But again, this is a thing which is kind of not making sense from an engineer's perspective on kind of why this is kind of like an unnecessary thing in some ways. But I would argue that it kind of is necessary as well, because this is a truly gorgeous building, quite remarkable, and it will be a national treasure one day, we hope. Lastly, a factory for furniture. Factories, typically, everybody knows what a factory looks like. It's got kind of like zigzag roof and a big chimney and smoke coming out of it. Except this one doesn't. It's in Norway. It's a timber furniture factory. It's built in the forest where the timber is farmed, and it's made of timber. Before I hand over to Gio, what about this carbon business? So in the UK, we have to do an enormous, since we signed up to the Paris Agreement, and then we now have legislation domestically in the UK which has committed all of us, the whole nation, to meeting the requirements of the Paris Accord by 2050, and we've got lots of targets to make. Now, we did this project was, I won't go into the details of it, but it's a big old building in the centre of London, used as an office, and we were first asked to refurbish it as a kind of first look. But the client also said, well, we'd like you to make it a bit bigger and stuff as well. And to cut a long story short, we did loads and loads of studies, and in the end, when you take account of demolition of steel work, and steel is about 88% recycled in the UK, recycling of concrete and glass, we could actually design a new building on that site which retained the existing basement and some of the structure, but just a bit, recycled as much of the rest of it as possible through a special program that we developed with a demolition contractor. And actually, per square meter, the new building has 75% less carbon emissions in its lifetime. What that means is, because the building is a bit bigger, but it's so much more efficient in terms of carbon, it means that even though it's a bigger building, overall, it performs better than the existing building in terms of carbon emissions over its life. And obviously what that means is that there's this kind of payback that you can get, where you invest quite a lot into building and carbon emissions to begin with, but then over time, there's a sort of payoff point. And this is something that in the UK now we kind of have to prove on every job that we do. And just to put that into context, the sort of area under those graphs can get you some metrics. And over a 60-year lifespan, which is the lifespan we have to use in the UK for our studies to submit to the authorities, the CO2 equivalent that we save is equivalent to about 30 times the area of the site if it was woodland. So it's interesting how science, engineering, and actual kind of studies by experts can actually inform us that when we harness that knowledge, we maybe have more choices than we first think when we set out. So it is complicated though, because sometimes you get that result and sometimes you don't. So and there's no, you can't just say, oh, because I did it on the last job, it kind of works on this one. Doesn't always work. So without further ado, Gio, all yours.
So what are we doing in Slovakia? In short, we're designing the new ACID campus along with InFlow, Bauchplan, Arab, and our local architects, Pantograph. The site itself is in Petráková, which some of you may know is on the crossroad between Lamacka Street and Čestnačeveni Most at the foot of Zelena Studienka, and it's kind of at the close range of the small Carpathians. And our proposal is a 12 pavilion kind of cluster that forms a curved silhouette and covered in PVs, and almost becomes an extension of the mountain ridge. As you can see, it's relatively open, well, actually really open, and public to the site. And at the same time, the idea is that we want to create a campus that it has almost no back face. But during the competition and over the last 2 years working with ACID and ACID leadership, we kind of had a lot of contradicting, let's say, elements within what we wanted to do and what was in the brief. And one of the strongest aspects was that the site itself is kind of embedded between nature and the urban environments. At the same time, we were asked to design a building, but a building for the neighborhood. We were also asked to design a headquarters, as it is, but at the same time kind of create a campus that is much more open and inviting. And being one company, it needs to be unified, but also architecturally expandable for the future and so forth. So being asset that they are kind of our protectors in our digital world, they deal with security, but they want a campus that's open. So how do we deal with that kind of environment? So we look kind of within first. So the first thing we thought about was workplace, and a typical kind of way of thinking, at least for an architect, how a workplace should be is this open environment, because we love open environments. But Asset are not that kind of organization, but also as well, we didn't want to just focus on Asset, but also how is the future of the workplace going to impact or relate to the world we are right now, especially during this kind of post-pandemic era. And if you think of your daily life, or at least the majority of daily life, working in an office is comparable to almost like an 8-hour long-haul flight, where you sit down, perhaps you open a laptop, you do some work, maybe talk to some people, have a meal. And it's quite, I would say, it's routine and also kind of very well thought out, but it's somehow quite efficient. So since we did this project during the pandemic, and where we are now is kind of towards looking how we can kind of improve the environment that we're in, we thought to ourselves, okay, what is the future of workplace, and how can we simplify it so that it doesn't overcomplicate things? And in general, our idea is that it should just be better than it was before. And it doesn't mean that we need to compete with where we work at home or where we currently work now, but to give kind of elements and an environment that is much better and much more friendly to, and much more enjoyable, where we all spend the majority of our time. And so you might think architecturally, we're just kind of thinking of a form, this campus that everyone can see from the outside. But over the last 2 years, we've kind of inverted that process and thought it from the internal aspect. And one of the key features for us was this just typical office arrangement. And what are kind of the elements that are really important to bring in. And the first one that we kind of thought of was just natural ventilation, just helping cool the building and creating a much more comfortable environment. The next step would be to just introduce biophilia, something kind of more relatable, something kind of more friendly, and in the end, kind of create an environment as well that deals with daylight, shading, and outdoor spaces, all for the purpose of being able to have a productive 8 hours, let's say, but also at the same time to be able to interact with people. So as you can see that the roof, how it's curved, also creates this kind of cascading floor slabs that create much more open, much more, let's say, interconnected platforms where people can actually sit down, have informal chats, meet friends, meet other people from other departments, all for the purpose of creating an environment that is much better than home, which is something that we all lack. Equally important from the beginning of the design was this, what's the energy story? There was one of the biggest demands was that this building has to be carbon neutral. So we looked at the source, and when I say we looked at the source, I also mean I mainly mean the engineers, because the engineers were the ones who actually formulated the strategy of this approach. But it just starts with a very key question: was how dependent do we want to be on fossil fuels? After 2 years or a year and a half of development, I think we're confident in saying that we don't want to have any dependency on fossil fuels. That this campus itself would generate its own electricity, but not just generate electricity, but also how it uses it efficiently, and at the end, store it and reuse it when necessary. But that means we would not sacrifice or compromise on any kind of internal comforts. We would still want to propose a campus that is very high-tech, very innovative, but also relatable to the human, which is kind of broken down into two very simple elements. One is nature, and one is, again, this village or small-scale, relatable aspect of our environment. So instead of creating something quite large and quite iconic in terms of from a street level, the actual campus is embedded within the landscape, almost hidden within the trees and the mountains. And at the same time, we're aiming to have a kind of a timber construction where possible, as much as possible. There are some fire codes that we need to respect. And the idea is to create a very open campus that invites not only just people who work there, but the entire neighborhood, the entire city, and hopefully around Europe as well. So from street level, as you can see, it doesn't kind of pop in a sense that it's a tower or it's a big campus with a giant logo, but instead it's quite soft and quite warm. And as you enter the space, and then as you enter the different kind of courtyards that are framed by these different clusters of blocks, you're met with landscape that it will be designed to become part of the campus, as well as the outdoor spaces that are at the upper levels that all of ESSET can use. We get asked a lot of questions about snow, and the simple answer is the question is how are PVs working during the snow, and well, they just don't work that well during that few weeks that there are. But during the rest of the season or during the rest of the year, the idea is that this campus will power itself, store its energy, and work with the environment it's in. And to do that, of course, it's much more complicated because we have 12 buildings, which is not very easy to kind of manage each one. But at the same time, within each cluster, we felt that it was important that the entrance area, at least the first part of the experience, is very public, which is why you have areas for sports, to celebrate technology, and for cycling. But at the same time, to create a very permeable block that is open on all four sides. And as a gift back to the city and to kind of to promote education and promote knowledge, there's also a venue for culture, very similar to the venue that we are in right now. And this all ties into the aspect that we're kind of more we had from the beginning, which is social sustainability. The idea to attract and retain talent for future within where we are now, but also how we can give back and make sure the next generation can have the same opportunities as we have now. So these two kind of key elements almost transform the community that the campus will have. And at the same time, with social sustainability, the ambition for the technological part is also equally high. Now, these are a lot of different elements that I won't go into into detail in, but we have been working with engineers to kind of balance the approach, because it's not about putting everything into it, every technology possible. It's trying to find that balanced approach of how we can harvest energy, how we can use it efficiently, how we can store it, and how we can store water and so forth. So it's almost like a good cocktail. The engineers will give us the ingredients, and the right ingredients, and then we'll serve it in a way. And from the beginning of the design process, what was very important to consider was the building life cycle. So we had this cradle to grave approach, which started from essentially how we think about the choice of the material, where it's coming from, how it performs, how easy it is to manufacture, how easy it to transport, into taking that material and make sure that it's quite modular, because of the speed of the construction, when things become very complicated, somehow there's delays, and we want to make sure that things work well. But most importantly, during the use of the building, we we're designing almost a future-proof design, which is where you have a standard kind of use for a building. Our approach is to extend it as much as possible, and that means the design itself has to be very flexible. And of course, once the building gets disassembled, how we deal with it in end of life is also equally important, which ties back to the materials that we chose before. To cut it kind of concludes very briefly. We've been working very hard for the last 2 years on this project. A lot of people have contributed to it. We're very happy where we are now, and I'm going to just hand over to Andy.
Thanks, Gio. So we're looking forward to completing this building over the next couple of years in Bratislava. To conclude, it is complicated, as you know. I hope I got that point across. But there's a couple of messages for everybody here who might be an architect or a client or a technologist or an engineer, and the message is very, very straightforward. We must harness the knowledge of engineers and all the clever people that are involved in our industry, and we must kind of take that kind of valuable knowledge, and we must use it in the most incredible way, potentially in a way that the people themselves that are focused on technology and engineering can't see because they're so focused doing incredible work. We must bring a kind of a much more societal and human angle to things, which typically means we drastically simplify the stuff that they said, and then we bring a twist to things. And the twist is that there'll be an element that is not pure engineering, and we must be able to argue as humans that there's some stuff in this building that's for humans as well. It's not just a perfect engineering solution. This is not petroleum, it's orange juice, right? It's nutritious, it tastes nice, and unlike petrol, it's not poisonous and flammable and dangerous. So we need to drastically simplify what the engineers tell us, and then use the drastically simplified version in creating something that's absolutely incredible. So we use their facts and their expertise, but we employ our architect's logic to things to make a better place. Thank you.
Ďakujem. Tak, ďakujeme veľmi pekne za veľmi inšpiratívnu úvodnú prednášku prvého bloku. A stále nie som odborník na danú tému, ale po tom, čo páni, ktorí nepochybne odborníci sú, povedali, že it is complicated, thank you very much, I feel a bit better about my own knowledge. A posledný príspevok na tému Asset Campus bude od Petra Moravčíka, ktorý je development manažér tohto diela. V minulosti pripravoval koncepty napríklad 300-metrovej veže vo Varšave s Norman Foster Architects, aj iné projekty v Londýne, a dnes bude hovoriť o aspekte spoločenskej udržateľnosti. Páči sa.
Ďakujem. Vždycky ťažké po takto silných speakeroch hovoriť, a zvlášť keď teda majú aj tak silný odkaz. Možno by som mohol aspoň vysvetliť to, na čo Gio poukázal, že ten brief v tom počiatku v mnohých veciach bol svojím spôsobom kontradiktorný, alebo bol taký, že sa muselo hľadať balans medzi dvomi vecami, ktoré zdanlivo sa zdajú byť protichodné. A ja si pomôžem, ale nadviažem na tú časť, ktorú Gio vysvetloval, ten cradle to grave sustainability proces, ktorom je teda potreba sa pozerať na všetkú energiu, ktorá súvisí s prípravou, výstavbou, ale aj prevádzkou, ale aj následne recykláciou tej budovy samej. A dovolím si poukázať na jednu veľmi dôležitú vec, a to je tá, že tá doba, v ktorej tá budova je v užívaní, môže byť veľmi dlhá a môže súvisieť s životnosťou toho základného materiálu, z ktorej je hlavná konštrukcia postavená, ale môže byť podstatne kratšia a to je práve vtedy, pokiaľ tá budova jednoducho nemá svojich adresátov, nemá svojich používateľov, nepotrebujú ju ľudia a vtedy sa stane nadbytočná, samozrejme udržiavať ju v chode stojí tiež nejaký energetický náklad a potom musí prísť nejaká recyklácia alebo nejaká aspoň refurbishment, ktorý je ten rovnako energeticky náročný, ako keby sme tú budovu celú strhli a celú od začiatku postavili. Veľmi podobný príklad, robil som pre developera, v Londýne sme kúpili budovu, bola to kancelárska budova London City, chceli sme postaviť kancelárskú budovu, ale ukázalo sa, že na to, aby sme doručili to, čo je treba doručiť, bolo potreba tú budovu rozobrať až po základovú dosku a postaviť na tej pôvodnej základovej doske novú. Tá budova mala rádovo 30 rokov. Otázka preto pre nás bola, ako zabezpečiť to, že pri takto komplexnej a veľkej investície bude tá životnosť tej budovy, nie je tá technická, ale tá spoločenská, alebo tá potreba tej budovy skôr tých 100 rokov plus, čiže skôr tá, ktorá sa približuje tomu, čo je reálna životnosť tej nosnej konštrukcie. A tam je základný determinant práve tá sociálna sféra toho základného chápania sustainability ako vyváženého konceptu medzi tým, čo je potreba urobiť pre planétu, či je tom environmentálnej zložky, samozrejme ľudskej zložky, čiže sociálnej časti a logicky aj tej ekonomickej časti. Čo je ale častokrát svedkami je, že sa hľadá akýsi kompromis medzi týmito tromi základnými sférami. Že vždy, keď sa pozeráme na udržateľnosť z hľadiska prírodného prostredia, tak sa pozeráme na to, že asi ekonomika utrpí. Že niečo treba investovať navyše, aby sme dokázali urobiť to riešenie dostatočne environmentálne vyvážené a logicky častokrát sa potom pozeráme na to spôsobom, z čoho všetkého sa budú musieť ľudia alebo užívateľe tej budovy zdať, aby ten celkový koncept bol v rovnováhe. Čož je práve ten dôvod, prečo sme na konci dňa si vybrali práve BIG pre spoluprácu. Pretože oni nehľadajú kompromis medzi týmito tromi zložkami, ale oni hľadajú win-win-win. Čiže hľadajú spôsob, pri ktorom vôbec nie je potreba poškodiť, či už je to ekonomickú alebo sociálnu stránku celého projektu, na to, aby bolo možné dosiahnuť, že z hľadiska prírodného prostredia je táto budova dostatočne udržateľná. A samozrejme, jeden z tých krásnych príkladov je práve to, na čo Andy poukázal, kde bolo možné aj napriek veľmi komplexnému zadaniu a veľmi komplikovanému zadaniu nájsť ten joy, alebo teda v tom ich odkaze tej hedonistického prístupu ku sustainabilite, nájsť ten sociálny aspekt dostatočne silný, aby proste vyvážil, aby bol vyvážený s ostatnými aspektami. Preto sme aj my, keď sme uvažovali nad tým, že čo vlastne potrebujeme, ak by sme teda prišli za pánmi z BIGu a povedali, potrebujeme kancelárskú budovu, tak by nám možno odpovedali, it's not complicated. A asi by sme sa tým pánom ani nevedeli dostať do ich kalendára, ale nie to je ten hlavný dôvod, pre ktorý to zadanie, ktoré Gio spomínal, bolo možno opticky nie úplne vyvážené. A to je práve to, že pokiaľ hovoríme o architektúre alebo pokiaľ hovoríme o budovách, tak častokrát definujeme cez nejakú funkciu. Hovoríme napríklad o kancelárskej budove. Problém je ale nastane v momente, keď sa zmení či už účel, alebo zostane účel, že kancelárska budova, ale sa zásadným spôsobom zmení spôsob, akým sa tá kancelárska budova užíva. A toho sme svedkami v týchto dňoch, kedy sa vďaka covidu a možno iným veciam zásadným spôsobom zmenil spôsob, akým pracujeme. A pokiaľ sa také niečo stane, tak sa kľudne môže stať, že kancelárska budova, ktorá naďalej je potrebná ako kancelárska budova, už nie je schopná plniť ten účel, ktorý by plniť mala a je potreba investovať ďalšiu energiu do jej adaptácie, readaptácie alebo zmeny. Preto sme my pri uvažovaní na Asset Campusom sa chytili niečoho, čo je podstatne stálejšie, má podstatne dlhšiu dobu, ktorej zostáva sebe samou, a to je vízia, s ktorou asset funguje a pracuje, a že sú teda ľudia, ktorí sú zameraní alebo odhodlaní proste robiť ten security, alebo teda IT security svet bezpečnejší pre jeho užívateľov a vyrovnávať akúsi akúsi informačnú nerovnováhu medzi ľuďmi, ktorí majú vysoký stupeň schopností v IT sektore, ale možno nie úplne korektné úmysly, a tými, ktorí naopak majú korektné úmysly, ale bohužiaľ nemajú ten IT sektor tak zabezpečený bezpečne, aby sa v ňom dokázali bezpečne pohybovať. A hľadali sme, čím tento campus dokáže byť podporou pre ich dosahovanie cieľa, samozrejme postavený na tých istých hodnotách, na ktorých funguje asset samotný, a to je odvaha, integrita, spoľahlivosť, ale aj nadšenie pre tú svoju prácu. A keď sme sa nad týmto celým zamysleli, prišli sme na to, že my musíme od základnej čiary premyslieť, čo vlastne znamená pracovné prostredie. A že to pracovné prostredie nie je len kancelária, nie je to len priestor, kde v nejakom stanovenom poradí sa vykonávajú zadané úlohy a tie sa potom majú v stanovenom čase odozdať nadriadeným a tak ďalej. Ale práve naopak, je to priestor, v ktorom tí ľudia na to, aby reálne dokázali nielen odozdať tú prácu, ale predovšetkým naplniť svoj potenciál. Predovšetkým pochopiť, kde všade je tá silná stránka. Nájsť spôsob, ako sa aj dovzdelávať, ako pomáhať ostatným, ale hlavne, akým spôsobom sú inšpirovaní k tomu, aby dokázali prinášať nové inovácie. A aké tie inovácie budú, to nikto nedokáže určiť. Také to 3M, Minnesota Mining, Manufacturing je krásny príklad toho, kedy spoločnosť je známa úplne niečím iným, než kvôli čomu bola založená. Preto sme, pokiaľ sme nad týmto celým rozmýšľali, prišli k tomu, že my jednoducho potrebujeme vytvoriť akúsi komunitu s veľkou pravnosťou zameranú predovšetkým na technologickú stránku, a že táto komunita okolo tohto campusu je práve tým základom toho, aby z toho sociálneho hľadiska mal ten campus zmysel a svoj dôvod pre existenciu aj nasledujúcich 100 rokov, a že práve tá komunita je tým základom preto, aby aj asset samotný z toho benefitoval, ale tá komunita zároveň mala by byť základom aj tej dlhodobo želanej transformácie Slovenska k vedomostnej ekonomike z takých tých klasických manufaktúr. Preto ten campus nie je taký tým klasickým campusom, ktorý by mal slúžiť len tým zamestnancom, ale mal by byť campus prakticky pre všetkých. Že by mal byť prepojený s prírodou, pretože príroda je ten elementárnejší, najzákladnejší, zároveň najefektívnejší spôsob relaxu, a relax je to nevyhnutné, čo potrebujete na to, aby ste v zápäti dokázali sa plnohodnotne sústrediť a podávať plný výkon. Samozrejme, to sa nedá bez toho, aby to bolo poriadnym spôsobom prepojené, či už s najbližším okolím, alebo s medzinárodným okolím, preto lebo potrebujeme, aby ľudia inšpirovali ľudí, aby tí ľudia mali možnosť sa, pokiaľ možno, dostať do toho campusu rýchlo a jednoducho. A pokiaľ všetko pôjde správne, tak pevne veríme, že spolu s ostatnými spoločnosťami v tomto území položíme základ nejakého inovačného hubu, zatiaľ pracuje nazvaného Danu Valley, ale vy ste si už 100-krát počuli o tzv. Zlatom Danubskom trojuholníku, veď sme práve teraz pri Danube, kde Bratislava spolu s Viedňou a možno aj s tou maďarskou časťou hrá veľmi dôležitú rolu. Preto, pokiaľ hovoríme o tomto kampuse, tak nehovoríme o kampuse, ktorý je zameraný na biznis. Nemáme taký ten prvoplánový spôsob, akým spôsobom sa počíta návratnosť, ale hovoríme o people focused. A veríme, že tí ľudia, pokiaľ budú robiť všetko preto, aby dokázali svoj život využiť plnohodnotne, tak z toho budú prosperovať nielen oni, ale aj organizácie, pre ktoré pracujú. Za týmto účelom samozrejme pripravený pomerne rozsiahlý, to parkom alebo čímkoľvek iným, ktorý poskytuje dostatočný priestor a zázemie, aby tá komunita mala kde možnosť existovať a fungovať, a čiže vo svojej prezentácii poukázal aj na funkcie jednotlivých objektov, že v podstate to ABCD sú tie hlavné objekty zamerané na tú, povedzme, pracovnú činnosť, ale je tam aj spústu iných satelitných objektov zamerané na práve ostatné veľmi dôležité podporné funkcie. Že miesto uzavretého campusu plotom potrebujeme campus, ktorý je otvorený svojmu okoliu, začlenený do mesta, je jeho integrálnou súčasťou, je mestotvorný pre túto časť. A komunikuje a ponúka rozsah tých svojich možností a služieb aj svojmu najbližšiemu okoliu. A to, čo je rovnako dôležité, aby bol neizolovaný, ale prepojený aj v tom veľkom meradle. Aby proste pokiaľ možno stal sa súčasťou tej európskej infraštruktúry práve tejto časti tohto segmentu informačných technológií. Ale rovnako, aby pokiaľ bolo možné, aj v rámci mesta bolo ľahké sa k nemu dostať. Je to práve tá časť, ktorá asi nemôže rátať s električkou, keďže tá bola vyhodnotená ako neefektívna. Neviem, či ešte niekedy je možné rátať s metrom. Práve preto robíme, čo môžeme v spolupráci či už s Ministerstvom dopravy alebo železnicami Slovenskej republiky, aby sme dokázali v rámci TIOPu Patronka využívať práve vlakovú dopravu, ktorá je najbezpečnejšia, najefektívnejšia aj z hľadiska ochrany životného prostredia najlepší spôsob dopravy. A či sa nám podarí prepojiť ten TIOP Patronka s univerzitným mestečkom Univerzity Komenského alebo Slovenskej technickej univerzity a zároveň aj SALku, ktorú máme oproti, tak dúfame, že áno. Takto vyzerá minulosť a dúfame, že nejak podobne alebo takto bude vyzerať budúcnosť, vďaka ľuďom z BIGu a ostatným ľuďom, ktorí sa na tom podielajú. A to je ten záver. Tak Gio, pardon ešte raz za to, že to zadanie bolo trošku komplikovanejšie. Ale it's complicated.
How does sustainability help to define architectural form? How we learn, it's complicated. The sustainability approach is not a return to the straightforward design in architecture, but an advancement towards a better understanding of materials and their impact, and towards using well-performing geometries in various conditions. At Zaha Hadid Architects, we are looking at every project as a new opportunity for innovation, and it's my pleasure to show you today multiple examples of the work that the office does today. Zaha Hadid Architects has over 40 years of experience and over 70 completed projects in around 20 different countries all over the world, and there are many more projects in the production. Zaha Hadid Architects' design is unique and geometrically exciting. Our teams work very hard on finding the most innovative ways to create solutions that will stand out, but not only because of their aesthetics and shape and geometrical complexity, but because of their performance. We believe that performance and shape can be linked, and this you can as well see on the slide now, and this is a selection of solutions developed for solar control, and the catalog of solutions is really wide. And every new project is a unique opportunity to come up with a new one. Our clients demand high design standards and reliable solutions for the environment. And we deliver this in every project we develop. The ambition of Zaha Hadid Architects is to continue to play a leading role in resolving critical challenges of global warming through constant improvement of the studio's work. The ongoing refinement of our work is essential in meeting these aims. And this means reducing the amount of waste in the construction, limiting the amount of components we need, investigating how to use less glass, steel, concrete in each building, and work more with natural materials. However, it's also worth noting that the best example of sustainability is permanence. And a building that has to be taken down is not sustainable. So producing visually sustainable, contextual, and transformational projects remains the goal for us. It means keeping control of the floor plan's efficiency and the design rationality to reach higher longevity. The parameters of nature, such as wind resistance, wind circulation, access to sunlight, and structural integrity, can enlighten the design. The earlier we consider sustainability principles in our work, the higher chance we have to create a really sustainable projects. At Zaha Hadid Architects, we work with international environmental consultants, and for each project, we develop a bespoke sustainability strategy, which is guided by the industry-leading standards as LEED, BREEAM, BD2M, and we really look at the specific and we really take a specific consideration of the building location. Zaha Hadid Architects sense the importance of having designers and architects in-house. Those are trained on computational methods, and a few years ago, we started an in-house sustainability team, which is helping us to develop these principles. I will share with you now a few of the projects and design criteria that we integrate to address these environmental needs. Firstly, integration of existing building. Refurbishment of buildings creates approximately 50% of the carbon footprint of the new building. So all around the globe, we see this radical shift away from, just demolishing everything. And a very nice example in the work of Zaha Hadid is the Port House in Antwerp, where out of the 12,800 square meters that was needed for the program, half of it was met by refurbishing a redundant fire station. When we are talking about embodied carbon, primary and secondary structures make as much as 75% of the embodied carbon of our buildings. And it's very important to look at how we can optimize the form to minimize really the structural needs as well. So let's say a little bit of a lesser cantilever can already change the number of steel you need. And for example, in the Lihasa Soho building in Beijing, we addressed this issue of the amount of steel needed by designing 2 supporting towers, and this reduced the structural requirements of each of the buildings. As well, material definition of the structure and all building materials is critical. Locally sourced materials or substitutes for steel and concrete are always welcome. And on the screen, you can see how we use timber structures. So when completed, the Gloucestershire Football Club of Forest Green Rovers aims to be the world's greenest football stadium, constructed entirely from engineered timber and powered by sustainable energy sources. Talking about the material substitutes and specification, one of the great examples is the Aquatic Centre in London, and here Zaha Hadid architects work closely with Arup, the structure engineer for this site, to select a custom-made concrete mix, which later became the green standard across the Olympic site. The design used a significantly higher proportion of the recycled aggregates. I show you how we could decrease the embodied carbon footprint by material and structure definition, but the sustainable approach starts always much earlier in the design, and the right design moves can affect as well the operation carbon. We consider local environmental conditions as weather, noise, sunlight, wind direction, and we look for aerodynamic shapes and natural forms for massing stages requiring feeder structure and making ventilation much easier. On the screen, you can see the Al Jadda master plan in Sharjah, and this is a focal point of the $6.5 billion Al Jadda development in Sharjah, and the central hub design conceptualizes the first moment when the water droplet hits the surface of the water, and it captures this moment in an array of elliptical buildings. Those are designed to channel prevailing winds into public spaces and courtyards to aid natural ventilation and cooling. Arada's commitment to sustainability and intelligent technologies is integrated within this central hub. The complex and natural ecosystem irrigated by recovered and recycled water is designed to sustain a microclimate at the ground level for gardens featuring plant species native to the region. And at the same time, the lighting of the entire hub is entirely provided by the solar power. Looking at the site planning and working with organic shapes is essential to analyze not only the environment to which we are bringing these buildings, but analyze the environment we create. And when working on the Alpo headquarters in Shenzhen, we simulated many wind angles and evaluated the frequency and intensity of the annual wind profile. And this was very important because we actually characterize areas where there was a high risk of exceeding safe wind speeds for pedestrians. So another principle was to then look at the design again and try to find solutions how to change the layout of the building, add trees, add some porous materials, windbreaks, to really shape the street landscape in a better and more usable way for people. Another critical factor that is integrated early into design is orientation. We analyze options to identify the most favorable orientation, reducing the solar gains, wind pressure on the facade, and providing shading. And a great example is the Central Bank of Iraq, which is currently under construction. And we're testing optimizing of the orientation during the early design stages led to energy-efficient self-shading envelope. You know, the facade design is a large part of any project we produce as architects, and from its orientation to the size of openings and facade types, considering materiality, finishes, construction techniques, and reducing quantities and complexity minimizes embodied carbon of the facade design and consequently improves the thermal performance. You can see it outside of your window, actually. But in the Sky Park in Bratislava, a glazing ratio of approximately 50% allows this facade to balance natural light, privacy, and while minimizing solar gains, cooling loads, and consequently energy consumption of the building. But when the design desires, you know, there has to be a large glass facade, we have to as well find a solution to have a second look at how to provide the best solar shading on a glazed facade. To receive on the glazed facades, those receive some direct sun during the occupied hours. And the example of this solar shading we can see on the Jockey Club Innovation Center in Hong Kong, where the use of external solar shaders was provided. Talking about operational carbon, we cannot forget about the low carbon energy sources. And for this, I would like to share with you the example of the Beijing-Dajing new open airport, new 2 years ago. And 10% of the use of the 10% of the total electrical energy demand of the airport is met by solar PV panels. Those are over the rooftops of the car parks. But sustainable buildings are not designed only based on one factor. Now I went with you through some of the factors, but to really design a fully sustainable building, we have to look at the building performance as a whole, and we need to look at many different factors. The good design requires thinking about a range of challenges and opportunities, such as well-being, water conservation, pollution, land use, consideration of human impact, and options for protecting and enhancing biodiversity. Increasingly, investors are required to report on this climate resilience to avoid future stranded assets. And it is essential to engage with the project team from early on. And first project that I want to share with you today, which is really looking at the full building performance, is the CSEP campus in Shanghai. And CSEP is Chinese leading energy conservation and environmental protection enterprise, which is developing projects focusing on renewable technologies that include solar, hydroelectric, and wind power generation, and environmental conservation initiatives such as water collection, treatment, and recycling. Continuing their commitment to renewable energy and ecological conservation, the new CSEP campus in Shanghai has been designed to be the greenest building with sustainability embedded really deep into its construction. And the project integrates passive design principles to reduce energy consumption and minimal solar gain, and is using advanced modeling tools to optimize the architecture massing to achieve this. Orientation and facade floor-to-floor ratios, external shading maximizes views towards the river, where eliminates direct solar radiation. The design also renovates and reuses an old sugar factory on the site. With Shanghai's significant temperature differences between day and night, each building's integrated thermal mass reduces the heating and cooling consumption. Extensive use of locally produced prefabricated components will reduce the project's embodied carbon, and support the local economy, where procurement will prioritize recycled materials. Photovoltaics located at roof level and within the facades are connected to battery storages and provide the site energy, reducing the energy consumption by 25%. And in addition to this high efficiency heating and ventilation, with waste heat recovery and cooling system using a non-potable water, the new campus will also use the thermal ice storage for cooling. Ice generated by chillers at night uses off-peak electricity that it's stored in thermal tanks, and then it's used for cooling during the day when the electrical consumption for cooling loads is at its highest. The building management system will continuously monitor the environment, the interior environment, and automatically react to changes in internal conditions such as variation of temperature, air quality, natural daylight, or number of occupants. The technology and intelligence system are fostering the sustainability aspect of CSIP, but however, with architecture, the shape and the form, we can as well help these and replace the mechanical parts in a way. And now we are looking at a unique project, which is the King Abdullah Petroleum Studies and Research Center in Riyadh. And you can recognize a series of sheltered courtyards throughout the building that provides controlled daylight. The center includes a research center with spaces for 350 researchers and about 1,500-seat exhibition hall and 300-seat auditorium. And Zaha Hadid Architects' architectural vision for the project uses a cellular, quasi-like modular systems to connect the different programs into a single continuous field, drawing at both natural crystallized forms and region's traditional architecture. The project received in 2016 LEED Platinum certification, and nothing was left to chance in this project. And the geometries were carefully modeled to reduce the energy consumption and mitigate excessive solar exposure. The overall complex is lowest in its north and highest at the south to shade itself from the peak of the sun, while the roof line has been designed to scoop in cooler air and provide that is prevailing from the north winds. The faceting of the roof panels maximizes the availability of the high-efficient surfaces for solar energy collection. And this faceting is as well creating a ground-level labyrinth that is creating a small indoor and outdoor spaces. Those are having individual microclimates. And overall, the architecture manages to create outdoor spaces which are comfortable and usable during all but the most extreme summer months. A project that I already mentioned, but it has much more to offer than improved aggregate, is the Aquatic Centre in London that was created for the Olympic Games in London in 2012. And that it was transformed into a long-term local community and national elite training center later on. The center exemplifies ZHA's innovative design and materials strategies to achieve value, functionality, and sustainability. The Aquatic Center was built with two primary configurations in mind. So the first configuration was the 17,500 seat space for the Olympic Games, along with the necessary back-of-house, front-of-house facilities. And later on, it was reduced to 2,500 seat for the community sport facility. Sustainability was considered at every opportunity of the design processes, and this dual-purpose design that was not really featuring only the big change of the stadium, but it's really considered in many different aspects. For example, movable floors in the pools are not only allowing people with disabilities to use the pool, but they are also creating a shallower pools overnight, what is reducing the heat loss. The pool styles and structural elements were chosen to reduce their carbon footprint, and Zaha worked closely with the project engineer Arup, as I already mentioned, to create the custom concrete mix. And the roof tile components are as well 50% recyclable, and the ceiling fitting is from sustainable timber. Throughout the low flow fittings of the water recycling, the facility uses 32% lesser potable water than other comparable pools. And this is the last example I want to share with you today. And it's a beautiful project that was officially opened just a month ago in Sharjah, and it's the BIA headquarters in Sharjah. And this is headquarters that it's powered fully by its solar. It's powered by its solar array and equipped with next generation technologies and operated at the LEED Platinum standard. The new BIA headquarters has been designed to achieve a net zero emission by the group management and administrative center, and setting out a new benchmark for the future workspace. With their strategy of sustainability and digitalization, BIA Group works closely across 6 key industries that includes waste management and recycling, clean energy, environmental consulting, education, and green mobility. Embodying these principles, the headquarters design responses to the environment as a series of interconnected units oriented and shaped to optimize local climate conditions. And the design is embedded in the Sharjah Al Sayah Desert context. The design echoes the surrounding landscapes, shaped by prevailing winds, into a concave dunes and ridges that become convex when they intersect. And ensuring all internal spaces are provided with ample daylight and views, while limiting the quality of glazing exposed to the harsh sun. The headquarters' 2 primary dunes are interconnected via the center courtyard, which is defined as an oasis and which is integral to the natural ventilation of the building. The overall shape of the building has been designed to provide most rooms with the direct connection to the courtyard with operable windows, which allow natural ventilation, and this will automatically shut off the mechanical ventilation when in use to reduce the energy consumption. The courtyard itself will be lightly tempered during its use by heat-recovered exhaust air from one of the building's air handling units, and this will further improve the occupants' comfort and use the thermal resource that will otherwise be wasted. Vestibules are provided at every entrance to limit the effect of wind and sand intrusions, and all air intakes have sand louvers to reduce maintenance impact and improve equipment performance. The 9,000 square meters BIA headquarters has sustainability really in its core, with a high percentage of locally produced materials. It is equipped with future-ready technologies to enable operation at LEED Platinum standards with net zero emission, minimizing energy consumption. Glass reinforced fiber panels reduce the solar gain, while slab and glass cooling regulates interior temperatures for optimum comfort. On-site water treatment filters wastewater to minimize the consumption, and its solar farm charges Tesla batteries to meet the building's energy demand throughout each day and night. And the employee experience will include contactless pathways, virtual concierge, and intelligent meeting rooms ready for the hybrid working. The intelligent building where sustainability is really at its core, that's the BIA headquarters. And I hope that I proved to you that the sustainability approach is not a return to the vernacular and straightforward design and architecture, but an advancement towards a better understanding and use of materials and understanding their impact on the planet, and towards a more efficient method with less waste and consumption and less consumed resources. Sustainable design strategies can inform the form and define the architectural spaces and improve the building performance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lenka. So the previous two offices are internationally acclaimed. They have presented the sustainable design, including a lot of engineering, technology, and research at different levels, and typologies and locations. And both of them, as we have seen, have also local interventions. So they have either existing or planning buildings in Slovakia. So, but how about talking about sustainability and not mentioning landscape architecture or urban design? It would be a shame. So, last but not least, in the first block, the contribution represents a bit different approach to the topic, not that much based on technology. And although they do not have a project in Bratislava or Slovakia yet, as far as I know, Kai Strasser, who is one of the presenters today, has been our favorite juror of the Prize for Architecture. So he does definitely have a knowledge of the local conditions, as he traveled across the country quite a lot. So let's give the floor now to Kai Strasser and Fernando Nebot Gómez, I hope the name was correct, and see the different approach in the last presentation of the first block.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really glad to be back in Bratislava today, fortunately for you, mostly in English. So as you said, we are landscape architects and urbanists, so we are actually not designing buildings, but more the spaces in between, or whole visions for cities or neighborhoods. And because we are working at this different scale, we also have probably a different vision on sustainability, which is less technical, and since we are working at the interface with society, it's what we would call more the social sustainability. So maybe one sentence I remember I said 2 years ago at the Caesar Award was "Máme veľký problém." And unfortunately, I can still repeat this, we have a problem. And I think all here believe in global warming, I hope so, today. And we have to deal with this. Our office, so we are based in Munich, Vienna, and Cologne. We came from Vienna today. Has 20 years of history now, so we are not that young anymore, unfortunately. And in those 20 years, so last year we tried to make a map of all climate disasters we've had in the 20 past years, and it was quite impressive to see that it covers almost the whole world map. And always when I turn on the radio or the TV or open a web browser, I see this kind of pictures, like floodings in Germany last year, or fire in Athens, or urban heat islands we all know are getting a problem in our cities. And I always feel like it has something to do with what I'm doing on a daily basis, but how to deal with this, how to find creative solutions to solve those problems. The answer is we need to act, and probably we need to act together, even if we are working in very different fields. So now we will show you a few of our projects at very different scales, and it's mostly public projects where social and climate resiliency meets also this social resiliency. The first project is a community housing project in Munich called Wagnis Art, and this project has received the German Sustainability Award, and as you will see, it's a highly social project. So it's in the north of Munich, close to the English Garden, and a place with a strong history. So it was a camp until the 50s, and actually we were involved at the beginnings of the project in the whole master planning of this area. And this is how we got to do with the site. And years later, we were asked to design this plot together with a team of architects for about 200 residents. And it's a cooperative housing, so we already knew who will be living inside the building, which is an ideal condition, because then you can develop the building together with them. And this was the main aspect of the project, and it was also the main reason why we got this, or one of the main reasons why we got the Sustainability Award in Germany, because of this social sustainability. So you had a colony of artists on the site, in the old barracks. They got involved from the beginning in the programming, form finding, defining what are their needs. Then the spaces got specified together. The programming of single spaces was made together. Of course, there were several meetings with democratic decisions of how to arrange the different functions. And this whole sharing culture was then brought into life also with workshops on site, self-making, planting trees together, and even the local residents are involved now in the maintenance of those spaces, which is also a way of being sustainable. So here we see a few models. It's not high-end architectural models, it's work models, as we love them, at different stage of the project. The first one is very early, very, very early. It was the question was, how would you arrange the spaces? And all the future residents had shoeboxes and were asked to put them, to build a model with them. And the second one is a programming model, and the third one is later in the planning process, a model to decide a few more specific things. And here you see on the right side the aerial view of the final project and a few of these models, and you see that even the shoebox model looked quite similar to the final aerial view, which means, wow, actually they've decided what it looks like and not us, which is good. So here, of course, we have all those technical parameters we've seen in other projects, especially before our speech. So we have a photovoltaic, we have with those 5 blocks which are connected with bridges, we have a system of fresh air corridors cooling down the complex by night. But what I wanted to put the focus on today is the use of the spaces. So we have 2 courtyards, and there's no lobby and playground and other different functions. There's one space fulfilling more than one function, and this is helping a lot to save space and being sustainable. So this is one of the courtyards. This is the other courtyard. Now there's a green one. And this is how the locals are using those courtyards. It's things that we didn't plan, that they were doing an ice rink on top of the, I don't even know if it's possible, there's an underground parking, but they are using the space in a really wonderful way. And it's not only at this level, so they're also planting trees and taking care of what has been started with the team of architects. But it's not only on the ground floor, it's also on the roofs. We've created spaces, different levels of privacy. So you have a really public courtyards. You have also a really public market space connecting to the road. And we have more or less private roof surfaces and community gardens. All of these are connected. And you see you have a really green roof, quite wild green roof in the middle of the city and of glass skyscrapers in Munich. Now I give the word to Fernando for the next project.
Thank you, Kai. The next project we're going to show maybe has a more focus on a participation in a public space. In this case, it was the redesign for the park in Puchheim, located in the outside of Munich. Puchheim is a small city, and the Kennedy Wiese was the park that we redesigned. It's located between a school and a graveyard. And it is, again, a site with a very interesting history. It used to be a landfill in the end of the 19th century. In the 1970s, there was a big construction around the area. And nowadays, it's basically an open green space. So part of our task was not only to redesign the park, but to reactivate the park, to make it become the new center of Puchheim. And for that, our participation approach was, again, through the whole phase of the project, starting before we even planned, with different workshops, different events, throughout the planning and throughout the building even of the park. I'm going to show you now a couple of the events that we did. For example, this was before the planning even started. We went there. We organized this workshop where the people could tell us their ideas. But also, I think in this stage, what is very important for us and for them to physically see the dimensions of the elements that could come in this park. For example, you can see a soccer field or different playing areas for the kids. A second event that we did was we created and organized a temporary ice skating rink, where the people could not only go there and have fun and realize that this is a place of opportunity for the future, but where we also use it as an opportunity to hear their ideas for the future park. And we combined, for example, when they rented out their booths, they could leave their opinions of what they want the park to have, what works, what doesn't work. Or this another of the workshops that we did with them after the whole planning and the different options of the park and the redesign was carried out. We developed those playing houses that are going to be sitting in the park at the end. And with the kids from the area, we had this workshop where they could not only decide on the patterns that would be on those houses, but also them themselves could be part of the painting process. The end result looks something like this. It's basically a very big green open space. And on the left side, we see those 3 playing islands that were also defined with the people there to see what exactly they wanted. And basically, it's a small design in what the new changes actually mean, but a very specific approach to keeping all the trees that were there, keeping all the possible uses that were there, and trying to reactivate this and to give this a new identity to a park that currently doesn't have this identity. The next project that we're going to show has, again, this participation approach, the social aspect of sustainability, but from an urban planning, in an urban planning scale. In this case, we're in Ingolstadt, in the outsides of the city, and the current state of the area is sort of between the fields and the single-family houses. And in this case, we were asked for an urban planning development area. And for us, it was important, in this case, the participation process with the people that would eventually live there or that live around there to make visible what the compromises could be. So what we did, the compromises during the planning process. So not only to hear from them a list of wishes that they would want to have in this area, but also for them themselves to see, okay, what happens exactly when I want to put a park in this area? What is the immediate consequence? That means that I cannot put buildings here, or the other way around. Where I put the school, that it's connected to the urban areas, etc. And for this, we developed a series of workshops. In the first one, it was about, we divided the plot in smaller squares, and then we gave out those different cards for the people, for them to design, okay, how dense does this area have to be? Where do we want the schools to be? Where do we want the green areas to be? In a second, more detailed workshops, it was about the building elements and those building typologies, but also about here you can see in green or in red, the different linear elements connecting the green elements, the roads. The idea was for the people to develop their own schemes, and that's what we did. We heard them, they themselves drew or played around in the model until there were many, many different options of it. And out of this, we developed a master plan after all those inputs from them and all those ideas, and with the technical requirements of the width of a street, the sizes of the buildings. This is a master plan that came out of it. But maybe in the next stage, it can be refined, it can be developed, and it's just we wanted to show there's another approach to urban planning too.
The next project called Agropolis is a strategy for the city of Munich. Also, this one is a project we started many years ago as an ideas competition. of how to reconnect agriculture to the city of Munich. So actually, it's a project covering the whole territory of the city of Munich with different ideas of how to make this reconnection happen. And so you see it's a 15 years old rendering, provocative image where we tried to show what if the fields would be in the middle of Munich instead of the lawn areas we know at the moment. And we all know that the medieval city was far more balanced with its what we call hinterland in terms of agriculture. So the fields around the cities were covering what the people in the cities could eat. And with the globalization and cheap transportation, all of this disappeared, and now the goods come from anywhere. And in the past few years, we've noticed that people are rediscovering this connection, and this is what the project tries to help and to sustain. So we had the chance after this first ideas competition we won in 2004, I think. So very old thing. We implemented a few of the ideas, and I will focus now on one of these ideas, which is the Freiluft-Supermarkt. Very German word, open space supermarket. And it's a city of hay, a temporary installation, quite big temporary installation in the urban development area of Munich-Freiham. You see the future plots, which are now already filled, at least with construction sites, when not with already finished buildings. And this was our temporary Freiluft-Supermarkt. So it was a space we've designed. Our task was to design this, to implement it, to build it, and also to organize a series of events during 1 year with the city of Munich. So here you have the 4 cinema posters of the 4 events we've made for planting and growing the stuff, then celebrating summer, and so on. So we had really interesting moments, and it was very important to have this space there in this area that didn't have nothing, it didn't have identity. It's a space, a growing part of the city, and it needs an anchor. And in our concept, this anchor should stay even there and not disappear at the end. Unfortunately, in this case, the surface had to disappear, but a few of the other ideas we've implemented were ideas that stayed in the space and remained as anchors within the city. This was obviously too big to remain. Next project is maybe slightly more technical. You've probably all heard of the sponge city concept. It's a sponge square in front of the main train station of Mannheim, just to show that we can also make a more technical stuff. So we're in a really urban development in front of a majestic German train station building. It's an intermodal node, tram lines, bus lines, taxis, and the train station. So not really much space to rest on this square. The vision is to give more space to pedestrians and cyclists, to add some green elements, and improve the quality of stay. So this is the site plan with the building below is the train station, and then we have those 2, the big square and also the part of the street in front. And our design parameters were, of course, also the pedestrian flows, which are really important in this kind of situation with the exits. You see the main exit of the train station, and also the climate conditions with surface temperatures. Technically, big issue was the underground parking again. So we had to have a really clever water management system, and all those green islands we see on the square, and the slopes, the slope design on the square is leading the storm waters or the rainwaters towards those green cushions, and only in case of really hard rain the water is lost to the sewage. So we always have this double system, sewage only as a last solution. And the other technical issue was giving those big trees, there's existing trees, there's also plenty of new trees, giving as much space as possible to the roots and, of course, leading the water to those spaces. And since it's an area with many pressure on the surfaces, so you also have delivery trucks, firefighters, many different things going on. It's not that easy to make a sponge under those loads. So here you see a few current pictures of the construction site, where you see it's almost like building a bridge for saving that space, that sponge space for the trees below. So the whole pavement is actually a bridge. Next project, also a train station, this time in Karlsruhe.
Exactly, a little smaller scale, but with similar conditions. In this case, we're in the south area of the station. It's a new urban development area, and what we see is between those two big buildings, there's a big empty space that currently looks something like this. It's basically not a square at all, but it's just an asphalt area where the cars can go easily to the train station. In the left side, we see it's like the south axis of the train station in Karlsruhe. Our vision was to sort of from the starting position, we have a very close space with those huge buildings on the sides, with a massive glass facades that have reflection problems with the sun, to try from the landscape and the design of the square to create a square that is livable and that you can go through without it being too hot or too cold. Our vision was to create a pedestrian-friendly space that, of course, has all the uses for the taxis and that it technically works, but the main driving force was to create a climatically friendly square, where the wind comfort is playing a role, where the water is playing a role, and the new trees planting is playing a very important role. So temperature, wind comfort, reflection, pedestrian flow analysis, and creating spaces where people can stay and not only go to the train station. These are, for example, some of the first climate studies that we did. Or another very important parameter, once we got further into the detailing, was where the car accesses have to be through the square. The sort of final result was what we have those two big lungs of new planting trees, and in the middle, water fountain that has it's an interactive water fountain that during the day and with the changing of the light and the changing of the wind sort of moves around like a sundial, and creates this middle space, still livable and still cool enough for the people to walk even in high heat. Here, for example, shows one of the problems that we're dealing with once we start really building this, and the fight with the city of how many big trees we're allowed to plant, and it cannot be only small new trees. And for those big trees, we again have this problem where we need a lot of soil space for them. We have the same problematic here, that we are building the whole square on top of a parking space, and here we had this idea to see how can we collect all the water that naturally comes from the rain, and we make it go to the trees and to make sure that they have enough water to grow and maintain. This whole process was also developed using parametric design, because those red areas where the traffic can go, delivery can go, fire trucks have to go, were sort of changing constantly. So the size of those dots and the position of those dots were drawn in a parametric way that they were adapting to the design as it changed. Our next project or next set of projects are located in Cottbus, in the outside or close to Berlin. Cottbus, I think one of the most interesting things would be to see here on the right side. You can see this whole area. Used to be an open coal mine that looks something like this, and it's currently being artificially transformed into a lake. And this will be like the biggest artificial lake in the whole Germany. And around this area, we've done several projects. For example, one of them was creating those visions of what this lake actually could look like and what are the energy possibilities for this future area. Another designs that we were involved in was the idea of creating a continuous bike path around the future lake, or this was an urban master plan that we also developed between the current city of Cottbus and the future lake. And in this case, one of the leading connecting elements was the old railway tracks that go through the middle diagonally, and that we transform into a continuous bike and green connection. I think in this urban planning, one of the interesting topics for us was the topic of water and water reusing, and how we wanted to combine the public and the private water collection systems, and to say that there's no water being directly flown into the underground canals and sewage system. So the idea to collect the excess water in private spaces and to overflow it and give it to use it to maintain the greenery in public spaces. And when this becomes overflow, we take it again to bigger retention areas that happen naturally in parks. So basically this waterfall system was also already embedded into the urban planning design in this case. Our final project in this case was the climate-friendly urban development design for the northeast of Munich. The current state of this area is a huge area in the eastern part of Munich, and it has a very heterogeneous character. It has those little small towns that historically developed there. It has a big waterway connecting them, and it has a lot of fields. And within this 600-hectare area, our task was to design a new urban development area for 3 different scenarios for 10,000, 20,000, and 30,000 inhabitants coming here. And here again, our driving parameter was the topic of climate, not only from the water, but also from the wind and the thermal comfort. Our idea was to make sure that the city sort of expands naturally around those existing small towns that we saw in the picture, and that we create big enough corridors of fresh air where the fresh air can come into the city and cool the city during the day and then flow again out at night. This was sort of our final vision, where we have those big connecting green elements that also connect to the bigger green infrastructure within Munich. And again, our idea that we were building around the existing centers. We're not creating totally a new island, sort of where everything new is happening, but we're always building on the existing and providing new social infrastructure to the existing areas, while also providing new built areas for the new inhabitants. And here we can see, for example, the 10,000, 20,000, or 30,000. Our idea was that it can also grow during time, that it doesn't have to be that we choose one of the options. And again, this idea of climate, of creating big parks where it's cool and the air can go through, and also protected warm squares within the built areas. During the whole process of this design, like not only for the big scale, but also then for deciding the smaller built elements, the surface temperature models were developed and were part of the redesign or the design of all those buildings. Also in the final model, we wanted to make this visible, that when we build cities, thermal comfort and wind are very important aspects that should be visible. And with all that, I think as a summary, we just wanted to show all those other parameters that can also be a very important part of urban design and of landscape architecture. And we were lucky last year to be chosen to curate the Garten und Landschaft. It's a magazine in Germany, one of the biggest magazine for landscape architecture in Germany. And here we took the chance to not present maybe our projects, but to make it as a call for everyone to act now. And for us, it was important to develop a series of interviews with all the actors that are involved in urban planning, in landscape architecture, in architecture, like not only the creators, the architects themselves, but the people who live there, the government officials, university professors, everyone who's involved in it. We had the chance to go with them through a series of interviews. What is for them the important elements that are going to have to happen in the next years? And we came up with this idea that we have to all work together in it. It's we don't have all the answers, but we have to work together and we have to find innovative solutions. And it's probably very likely that we won't find at the first time the right answer, but we have to work together to find our way. Thank you very much.
We are in the second part of block 1, that's the panel discussion. So I would kind of like to ask all the speakers to join me on a podium. I really feel I want to be a bit selfish, and I have so many questions for you. I would gladly just not like to have a look at the screen, and I would just try to ask my questions, but I would just like to remind everyone here that you can ask your questions using the Slido application, which we can see already, I believe, on the screen, the QR code, so you're able to download it. But first things first. And I hope, gentlemen, you allow me to ask the first question, our only lady here in the block, and I would like to use this international law, that the ladies first. So the question I have for every one of you, but I will start with Lenka. It's very simple. If you ask a car designer what is the essential of the design, what car designer thinks should be involved in a design, if you ask a doctor what's the procedure you apply in your practice, you usually get the straight answers. The question is, if the architects have the straight answers to the question, what factors led you to the biggest success towards sustainability as the architect? I know it's maybe not a very easy question to answer, but maybe, Lenka, if you can try in a couple of sentences.
It's not easy at all, but
it's complicated.
I will try. For me, architecture is always a team sport. So I would say the biggest success and the way how to achieve a truly sustainable building is as well in the teamwork, in working with really good engineers and consultants, but it's as well in having a really good client and having a good relationship with the client. On one hand, to be able to explain him what is important from the sustainability point of view for the building, but as well having in them a partner to make the special, the extra mile, and then bringing really the sustainability into the building management and the maintenance of the building.
You mentioned the client. I think everybody expects from studios like Zaha, Hadid or Big that you have always open-minded clients. You don't have to convince them about anything. Is it true, or is it really challenging also for the studios like you have? Is Zaha, Hadid always straightforward sustainability design, or do you always have to also a little bit convince the client going towards maybe some areas which he doesn't or is not very sure about? Who is the motivator? Is it always a client, or is it you as an architect who sets the targets and try to convince the client maybe also about sustainability? How is the reality?
For me, on the projects I work on, it's always about a discussion. I mean, yeah, it's true, we have fantastic clients, and but there is still, there are still things that we have to convince them about, mostly if they are connected to price. And I think everyone can agree that, the budget is just as big as it can go and you cannot expand it. But it is about discussions, and there are definitely as well some moments when, the clients are pushing us to try even harder. Sometimes, maybe they want to go even to the higher certification, and it is up to them.
Yeah. So it's always a challenge, not only for the client, but it's also a challenge for you. We can probably agree that there is a challenge on both sides. Andy, Gio, question for you. Maybe not the same question, if you like, but the question about the client mentioned here today, asset. And there is a one slide which I really had to take a picture of, and there was we are dedicated to protecting the progress that technology enables, and we probably all can agree that technology and the connection between the technology, engineering, and the architecture is the essential part in order to meet the goals which we heard are very important. So what is your workflow as architects, except the fact it's complicated?
So I think, yeah, of course it's complicated, but we do have the capability to structure a kind of and analyze a problem. I think that all architects, landscape architects, engineers, the first thing that we do, and Ioannis, you'll agree, we're kind of pretty rigorous on that, is about analysis, always. We also do some covert analysis on our clients, don't we? So we like to understand who we're dealing with before we even meet them as much as we can.
Are you picky? Sometimes you don't take the project?
Sometimes, no,
Okay.
not really. We have to survive.
Sure.
So we can't afford really to be picky. But I think that there are very few bad people, should we say, that are in a position to commission a building of any kind. Right? So by the time that society has put you in a place where you can commission a building, then that person tends to be kind of quite a complete individual, as a general rule. So yes, we do study our clients, we do study the problem, and then we enter into a process of collaboration. As you said, it's a team sport, and then in some ways, in the early stages, we can simply be a curator of ideas among other people. I think that was demonstrated incredibly well with these landscape projects where you involve the local people, and then and only then can we sit back and try to synthesize a solution.
Gio? Some disagreement
No,
with what Andy said?
I completely agree. I don't know if my mic is working. Oh, is my mic working?
Yeah. It's working, yeah.
Okay. No, I agree with Andy. It's a little bit more, it's challenging on a day-to-day basis, I have to say, because sometimes engineers don't give you the answers.
Is it more challenging here in Slovakia comparing to the others? Just be honest. Tell the truth. Yes.
Yes, a little bit. But only because we're used to a certain market, and transitioning to another market is also equally difficult. So you go anywhere, it's pretty much the same challenges, mainly the language, which is quite difficult to pronounce. No, I mean, and also trying to do a more pioneering project is definitely much more challenging. But I mean, this is why we embrace these challenges head on and try to kind of embed it very early on into the concept. But that just means we're making everything a little bit more difficult, but I think in the end it's worth it.
Thank you. Before we go to the questions from the audience, I have a maybe also challenging question for you, gentlemen, and it's going to be different than those questions or the question I sent last evening, because I feel like there's another important message to say. How is it for landscape architects, and how difficult it is to work with municipality? Because, yeah. So what's the story? Because we always feel like, it's my personal feeling, of course, that I go abroad and everything works, And sometimes we have a feeling that if we go abroad, everything works much better, and there are no complications, everything is just smooth, everybody's open-minded. So where are we standing when we are in Germany, for example, in Austria? How difficult it is?
I'm really, really glad for the question, because when you were asking about clients, I was waiting for this. Municipalities, public clients. And for me, they're slightly like an octopus. It's like, it's not one, it's many. And there's always one department, or at least in big cities, that doesn't agree with the other ones, and we're in between. And it doesn't matter what we're doing, it's always wrong, because they cannot agree between themselves. So I think, and this is quite an important message, I think, in sustainability, the smaller cities are the drivers of sustainability and of change and of innovation. The big ones, you need really a lot of luck and a lot of time, but we don't have time anymore. So that's why we are luckier in mid-size cities and municipalities, because there you can get like the drive, and there it's easier.
And you probably need to start as a very young architect, because till the process is over, you are retired, right? Good. So probably that's time we can ask some questions from the audience. And I think the first question is very good, because we're still talking only about technology. And the question, which is quite straightforward, what about technology and the climate change impact? Is this the way? Is the technology only way how to, fight the climate change, or is it also about the user, about how we behave and what is our behavior and how it changes? Because people think about sustainability that if I want to be sustainable, it has to directly connect with discomfort, because I will have not enough water to wash my hands. There's going to be too cold or too hot inside the house. So where is it true? I will maybe again start with Lenka, because when people see the design, which is fantastic, but the materials used like steel and concrete, and glass. So how do you relate to sustainability using these materials, and how do you approach
Well, I
climate
think you
change?
haven't seen my presentation.
I mean, for materials like this in Slovakia, I just want to say that we are fighting against the carbon neutrality. Actually, using these materials in minds of people is related to high carbon. So the approach of the architect doesn't have to be necessarily that these are bad materials. So what is the approach which you use in Zaha, the architects, when you start design?
As I was as well a little bit touching on that during the presentation, there are some cases where you just cannot really replace a steel structure or concrete structure with something else. But it is about finding the way how to optimize the structure as well. So, in case of the Lisa Soho building in Beijing, we would use 2 supporting towers to minimize the number of steel elements they need. So, yes, you have to sometimes go for these elements. But when you are able, you can go for recyclable materials, you can go to new aggregates, as it was used, for example, in the aquatic center in London, or you can go for replacement of really the locally sourced materials, as it was in the stadium with the timber element. So I don't think we can just, currently in this moment say that, as architects, we will not use steel anymore in our language, but it is about the finding the middle ground.
Yeah. Gentlemen, what about you? Is the technology the leading part, or what do you think is the essence?
My feeling is that looking at the way that we analyze things, you always start with what if you did nothing. Right? And obviously, typically you fail at that point. Otherwise, why would the customer have come and banged on the door? So, but working from that, there's, of course, you can do nothing, but it's a bit like, imagine a scenario where you own a gas-fired power station, right? We have all these. Our governments have put together all these targets that we have to meet. So every year you could just turn that down a bit so that you met the targets. But eventually you're going to have to decommission the power station, and you're going to have to produce the power with low carbon methods. So I think that there's another analogy would be driving a kind of very efficient, kind of reasonably modern turbo diesel car, and then what do you do in terms of the carbon impact of that? Well, you could kind of drive it a bit less. You could be scared to kind of get rid of it, because that would be a terrible waste, and then you would be buying perhaps an electric car which has got more embodied carbon in it. It's kind of like quite a tricky kind of thing. But whenever we go through the process of analysing these things, it often comes back to a solution which is the best result comes from something which I think was in the last presentation, take decisive action as early as possible. Always the best outcome is being decisive and taking action as soon as possible, because in the analogy of the gas-fired power station, the day will come when you have to turn it off, right, by law. So you may as well get on with it.
Yeah. So the things are not black or white. Things are basically evolving, and using the tools we have currently, either it's certification, sustainability certification, or as a tool can be analysis, which is part of the process, the integrated design process, might improve the project. I have a question for Gio, and the question is, do you plan a mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery? If not, what's the ventilation concept during the summer? Probably that's touching the natural ventilation part you mentioned. So please.
Yeah, I really don't want to disappoint my my MEP engineers with this question. But yes, there is a mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery. But the ventilation system is designed so far to be very user-focused. So in terms of cooling during the summer, we didn't want to just rely on typical, let's say, mechanical, but create different systems that enable the user comfort to be at its highest level. That's why natural ventilation is quite a key figure. The facade does a lot regarding its performance. And at the same time, because the kind of cooling comes from the floor, it's becoming quite a challenge to design a space for single cell offices, which is how ESSET wants to design their office. But overall, it's not just how the mechanical ventilation works, it's what is it powered with. And we have an array of kind of technologies that we're implementing, focused specific on ventilation, and that hopefully drives the energy consumption down.
So if you merge it, the passive design is step one, where you try to optimize the facade, and then afterwards you think about the system and how to cover the loads which are created or necessary for cooling, heating, and so on. So Lenka, the question for you, how you integrate, for example, the public opinion into your design? Is there some discussion as a normal part or usual part of your process, or how does it work?
I think the difference as well between the bauchplan attitude and, let's say, ZHA is who is the client. I mean, if the client is the municipality, of course, you have a more discussion with really the city, with the stakeholders, with the inhabitants. In case of the private clients, I think it would be very difficult to have 250 meter tall headquarter and then ask the people around the site how they imagine the headquarter to look like. But in case we have as well clients, those are municipalities
or master plan projects.
Or master plan projects, of course, there would be a different interaction.
Yeah, I have to say that it's starting to be an essential part also in Slovakia, that these discussions are opening and people are discussing what they like, what they don't. I don't know in how many cases it's really accepted, how many cases it's just to make people feel happier in the environment, but it's starting to happen also in Slovakia, which is great news, I think. And we have another questions here. I would just cite the question, how do you respond to the fact that many of the buildings are built for the investment purpose? For example, approximately 1/3 of Zaha towers in Bratislava are empty, no one lives there. This, I think, something up to the opinion of the people living in the area, what they think about the design, how they feel about how empty or full are the buildings. In many statistics, we always hear, especially in Slovakia, that we are not having enough, space, enough flats, and that we are underrated in terms of the statistics. So this is really a personal opinion, I believe, and we have a lunch time to discuss maybe these things in a more personal way. And I would just jump straight to another question because we don't have so much time left. Yeah, this is a question, the border between the environmental responsibility and sustainable approach in the construction and the greenwashing are current topics. People are thinking, people are talking, you have social media. For somebody this is sustainable, for somebody it's not, for some people only wood construction is sustainable, but in countries where fire protection laws are quite strict as our country, not possible for every project. So how do you respond to, or what is your way of fighting the greenwash? Because I'm pretty sure you're probably meeting this greenwash everywhere we are, and it's more urgent currently because the climate crisis, energy crisis. Gentlemen, how do you fight this topic in your work?
I think it's, sorry, it's very loud. I think from our part, I mean, it's always a little hard then to differentiate between greenwashing and real sustainable design. And think from our part, it's really the focus should be on the perseverance that the design, the architect, the landscape architects have such a great vision at the start, and they have this power to persevere through the whole planning process, that they can start with a super strong environmental design approach that maybe through the process it gets a little smaller, and through the whole the borders or the problems that might arise, but that you end up with like a still high goal of sustainability. And I think the greenwashing is when you either don't have this from the start and you just then put a label at the end. From our part, we try to fight it that this comes really from the start, and that we try to maintain this sustainable from the start, and to hold it through as much as possible.
Yeah, maybe representing the picture of the global warming with the flooding. It's the right answer. I've answered to that. Gentlemen, another question for you. How do you clean and how do you maintain the lakes, for example, which you were talking about? Because they're artificial probably, there's no fish and stuff. How do you do that in a sustainable way, the best?
I don't know if it was about the biggest German artificial lake, the big one, which is not our project.
Most probably.
And I'm not saying that I don't care if it's clean or not, but it's not our contract. No, but I know they are digging really deep. It's a really, they have millions and millions of euros just for digging it deeper than it was to keep acid waters below. So it's a really complicated construction site, but it's not ours. For the other ones, all the retention areas, we are also using plants for cleaning the water as a first step. But of course, there's maybe one topic we didn't speak about today, is it's regulations of if the streets are sorted in winter or not, because the plants don't work well with sort. And so this is a big topic in designing this whole intelligent rainwater management systems to separate what are the sidewalks that are not sorted, what are the carriageways that are sorted, and so on, just to get the most area possible that goes to the trees and to the plants, and then that can be cleaned even by plants in
So basically natural cycle.
Yeah,
nature brings, and we don't have to think about it because the nature is the solution for many, many things. And we have another question, especially there's directly to you, Andy. It's in Slovak. I don't know how your Slovak is as you started the asset project.
Not so good.
Not so good. So I'm going to help you.
It looks quite complicated.
Yeah, it's quite complicated.
Not so many vowels.
Happiness. Happiness is the key message of this question. So how do you think about happiness as a parameter in terms of creating the architecture? Happiness of people living in the area and the campus. And is this parameter somehow considered in your design? Also from the maybe economical point, how this balance works?
Of course, that is one of the most important things. And I think that was kind of intrinsic in the message that I was trying to communicate, is that technical perfection of things is probably somewhere less than our final destination as a species. We should be able, like we can do so many things, we should be able to do those things and enjoy ourselves while we're doing it. And that's very much our goal and our approach to sustainability, which is probably the most important aspect of building design at the moment. But the happiness of people that visit and use the buildings and live in them sometimes and so on is paramount. The project is a failure if that's not happening. So yes, it's one of the key parameters, along with embodied carbon, in terms of that there's no kind of unit of measure of happiness in the same way that there is for carbon that municipalities will check in on when we submit our drawings, of course. But this is one of the intangibles, and it is the thing that it's absolutely our job as architects to bring happiness and joy to the projects that we are responsible for. 100%, yes.
Probably if you work with happiness inside yourself, then probably you give a happiness also into your projects. We can conclude in some way it should work as a balance.
I think we have, maybe the balance is happiness and exhaustion, I think.
Oh yeah, that's the life of an architect. We are in the end of the discussion, and maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, your key message, which you would like to people to remember when they go before lunch. Gentlemen.
Don't measure performance only with technical parameters.
Lenka.
I would like to continue on that as well, to look at the form, the building form, to really find a better performance, so you can achieve it by the geometry and not just by the mechanical parts and technology.
Thank you, Andy.
I would say to anybody who might be a skeptic about this whole carbon business, I mean, I'm not sure if there are any skeptics here, but just in case there's anyone who's slightly a skeptic about the business of carbon and it being a kind of metric which we measure everything by these days, I had it explained to me, and it's my kind of privilege to be able to explain it to other people frequently. Just think of it as pollution. If you're in a room, like we have 400 parts per million carbon, and we're looking to limit that to 450. If you're in a room where there's 1,000, you feel kind of groggy. You don't like being in a stuffy meeting room. And if that level gets to 2,000, you get a pounding headache. And if it gets to 4,000, you start to have health issues that come with it. So do we ever really want to be in a position where we have to close the windows on our buildings and run equipment so that we can experience fresh air that doesn't give us a pounding headache? The answer must be no, and whether you believe in the carbon thing or not, it's important.
Just close the window and breathe. Gio.
I'm going to agree with Andy, but yes, maybe to contradict the title of his presentation, sometimes it's just simple. So just do it, and we can do the work. Yeah, that's it.
And we can conclude it's complicated. Thank you very much to everyone. We are at the end of block 1. You are very welcome to join us for lunch break, a little refreshment, and we will come back again to block 2. Thank you very much to everyone, every other panelist. And I'm pretty sure we're going to have time maybe to discuss and
for sure.
Thank you.